Paul Heyman reacts to Jacob Fatu attacking Solo Sikoa on SmackDown, and kicks him out of the Bloodline for good. What if I told you that the monster Roman Reigns unleashed is now out of control? That the Samoan werewolf, Jacob Fatu, was never meant to be a soldier. He was the weapon. And tonight? He just turned that weapon inward. On SmackDown, chaos erupted, real chaos. Jacob Fatu didn't just attack Solo Sikoa. He ambushed him. No words. No warning. A sudden, savage assault that left the enforcer of the Bloodline laid out cold, face down on the mat. And then, Paul Heyman appeared. The wise man. The last surviving architect of this crumbling empire. And what he did? What he said? It shocked everyone. Because for the first time, in front of millions, Heyman looked into Jacob Fatu's eyes. And made a choice. Not with a promo. Not with a smirk. But with 7 words, cold, final, and impossible to walk back: you're out. You're not Bloodline. This isn't just betrayal. This is collapse. And if you thought the Bloodline couldn't fracture any further, you're dead wrong. Let's break down exactly what happened, why Fatu turned, how Heyman responded, and what this means for the future of WWE's most feared dynasty. What if I told you the monster Roman Reigns unleashed is now out of control? Not just rebellious. Not just violent. But untethered, untamed. What if I told you that the Bloodline's most terrifying weapon wasn't built to follow orders? That Jacob Fatu, the Samoan werewolf, was never a soldier. He was never part of a strategy. He was the warhead. And on the June 21st edition of WWE SmackDown, that warhead exploded. No theatrics. No warning. No build-up. 1 minute, Solo Sikoa was standing in the ring like he always does, stone-faced, silent, dangerous. The next? He was face down, motionless, a crimson smear on the mat while the crowd roared, horrified and electrified in equal measure. Jacob Fatu didn't just attack Solo Sikoa. He dismantled him. Systematically. Brutally. With a kind of fury that didn't look like professional wrestling, it looked like vengeance. Like a message sent in blood and steel. And then the camera panned up, and we saw him. Paul Heyman. The wise man. The mouthpiece of gods. The man who built empires with whispers and handshakes. He walked to the ring slower than usual, his eyes filled with something we hadn't seen in years. Fear. But what came next? That wasn't fear. That was execution. 7 words. No promo. No gimmick. Just ice cold, legacy-ending finality: you're out. You're not Bloodline. For the first time in years, Paul Heyman made a choice without Roman Reigns. And it wasn't just a betrayal. It wasn't a twist. It was an implosion. The empire known as the Bloodline, once WWE's most powerful faction, just turned in on itself. And the fallout? We're still trying to calculate the damage. This isn't just wrestling. This is a Shakespearean collapse in real time. Let's stop pretending this is just about storyline progression or good booking. What happened on SmackDown wasn't just shocking, it was historically significant. We're witnessing the dismantling of one of the most dominant story arcs in WWE history, and it's not happening with a bang. It's happening with internal combustion. When Roman Reigns created the Bloodline, it wasn't a faction. It was a kingdom. Every move was orchestrated. Every betrayal was calculated. Jimmy and Jey Uso were pawns turned princes. Solo Sikoa was the blade. Paul Heyman? The hand of the king. But here's the thing about kings: when they vanish, the knives come out. And Roman Reigns has been gone for months. Without him, what was once tight and tactical has turned volatile. Jimmy turned his back. Jey walked away. And now Solo Sikoa, the most loyal of all, is the one laid out and left behind. Why? Because Jacob Fatu didn't come to join the bloodline. He came to redefine it. Let's rewind it for a second. Go back to the second hour of SmackDown. The pacing was strange. The energy in the arena was volatile, buzzing with something no one could quite identify. Then the music stopped. The lights dimmed. Solo Sikoa stood alone in the ring. No mic. No backup. He was supposed to make a statement. The rumor was, he'd be officially anointed as the new head of the bloodline in Reigns' absence. That this would be the night he rose from enforcer to tribal chief-in-waiting. But then came the turn. Jacob Fatu entered the scene like a ghost. No pyro. No promo. Just presence. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't boo. They just reacted, that stunned, guttural sound that only happens when something real is happening in the middle of a scripted world. And Fatu didn't hesitate. He hit the ring with the velocity of a missile. One spear. One moonsault. Then another. Then another. No posing. No taunts. Just rage. Ferocious, unfiltered rage. It was clear from the first strike, this wasn't a heel turn. This wasn't a debut. It was a message. Solo wasn't the enemy. He was the example. And the message was simple, I'm not here to serve. I'm here to conquer. As EMTs and referees tried to check on Solo, the camera shifted. Paul Heyman appeared at the top of the ramp. He didn't speak for over a minute. He didn't move quickly. He barely moved at all. He looked down at Solo. Then he looked at Fatu. And the look wasn't confusion. It wasn't panic. It was decision. When Heyman finally made it to the ring, Jacob Fatu stood still, unflinching, unapologetic. Two titans, built from different wars, stared each other down. Then Heyman raised the mic. But he didn't cut a promo. He didn't build to a climax. He didn't do the Heyman thing. He just said, "You're out. You're not bloodline." Then he dropped the mic, turned, and walked out. And that's when it hit everyone, this wasn't about power anymore. This was about purging. This isn't just the end of a stable. It's the end of an ideology. The bloodline wasn't just a faction. It was WWE's narrative backbone for nearly 4 years. It defined title reigns, main events, careers. It blurred the lines between performance and identity. It took family, culture, and dominance and wove them into something that felt real. And now? That story has officially turned in on itself. Jacob Fatu is the living embodiment of chaos, of what happens when you put a monster in a system built on control. Solo Sikoa was supposed to be the new leader. But now he's not even a member. And Paul Heyman, the mastermind, the string puller, the man who stood beside Roman Reigns through everything, just made a call without the tribal chief's blessing. This isn't just betrayal. This is collapse. The bloodline is no longer a dynasty. It's a civil war. The question now isn't what happens next. It's who survives? Roman Reigns hasn't responded. Not publicly. Not on social media. Not even in backstage reports. But his silence is more terrifying than any promo. Because when Reigns does return, and we know he will, he's not walking into the same bloodline he left. He's walking into a war zone. Paul Heyman has drawn a line. Jacob Fatu has crossed it. Solo Sikoa has been left in the dirt. Jimmy and Jay are ghosts. And the crowd? They're not picking sides. They're watching it burn. The Empire has no leader. Only chaos. In this video, we're going to break down everything, why Jacob Fatu did what he did, and what it means. The full emotional and strategic weight behind Paul Heyman's decision. How Solo Sikoa went from the most loyal soldier to the first casualty. The fan reactions, the history, the psychology, and the future of the bloodline. And yes, where Roman Reigns fits into this now crumbling war machine. This isn't just analysis. It's autopsy. So buckle in. Because what happened on SmackDown wasn't just an episode. It was a turning point. And we're going to dissect it from every angle until the truth is undeniable. The bloodline didn't just fracture. It died. SmackDown was never supposed to go like this. It was just another Friday night on the road. The crowd in Chicago was buzzing, already fired up from the chaos of recent weeks. Rumors had been swirling since morning. Jacob Fatu had officially signed with WWE. Social media was already in meltdown, fantasy booking how and when he'd appear, who he'd target, and how it would shift the power balance inside the bloodline. But even in the most chaotic Reddit threads or speculative Twitter posts, no one predicted this. The night began like any other post-Roman bloodline segment. Low lighting, slow pacing, dramatic pauses, and that air of tension that always hung like smoke above the entrance ramp. When Solo Sikoa walked out, the crowd reaction was mixed, not because he wasn't intimidating, but because people didn't know what he was anymore. A leader? A placeholder? A pawn? He entered the ring with no one behind him. No Jimmy Uso. No Paul Heyman. No music, aside from his own. It felt lonely. That wasn't by accident. The arena lights dimmed lower than usual, focusing all attention on Solo standing dead center in the ring. His face didn't move, but something was different. His fists clenched. His breathing was tighter. His stance shifted from proud to wary. He was expecting something. And he got it. The Titantron flickered for half a second, just long enough to make the live crowd think something had gone wrong. Production never glitches on WWE. A glitch means something's about to happen. And just as the murmurs began, the hard cam caught a figure moving through the crowd, cutting past barricades. No music. No entrance. No build-up. Just Jacob Fatu, making his way down the steps like a predator who didn't need to sneak. People parted for him without thinking. It was instinct. Fatu didn't carry himself like a wrestler making a debut. He walked like someone who had already claimed the place as his. Inside the ring, Solo didn't flinch. He stared directly at Fatu. He didn't move. He didn't run. But his shoulders rose ever so slightly. He knew what was coming. Fatu vaulted the barricade and slid into the ring in one motion. The arena exploded. The commentary team went from scripted commentary to genuine alarm. Michael Cole's voice cracked when he shouted, "Wait a minute. What the hell is going on?" There was no handshake. No nod. No expression of family ties. Jacob Fatu launched himself at Solo with a shoulder tackle that knocked the enforcer back into the ropes. The crowd's noise turned from excited to stunned. This wasn't a debut. It was a mugging. Solo tried to counter. He threw a right hand. It connected. Fatu didn't budge. Instead, he snarled and delivered a spinning back elbow that dropped Solo to one knee. Then came the onslaught. Clotheslines, super kicks, palm strikes. Fatu moved with the speed of a cruiserweight and the force of a freight train. Solo Sikoa, the man who once took down Matt Riddle, who stood toe-to-toe with Drew McIntyre and John Cena, couldn't even stay vertical. Every slam echoed. Every blow looked stiff, unscripted. The referees on the outside didn't try to stop it. Production didn't cut away. This wasn't chaos being managed. It was chaos being allowed. A particularly brutal Samoan drop left Solo sprawled on the canvas, coughing, rolling onto his side in pain. But Fatu wasn't done. He climbed the turnbuckle and launched into a picture-perfect top rope moonsault. It landed flush. The air left Solo's lungs. He didn't move. The crowd was now split down the middle. Half of them were on their feet in shock, hands over their mouths. The other half were chanting Fatu. Fatu, like they had just watched a king be crowned. And that's when it happened. The camera didn't cut to a replay. It stayed fixed on the stage. Paul Heyman walked out. No music. No mic in hand. Just him, wearing his classic black suit, his face pale, his eyes wide. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if each step was part of something much heavier than a manager coming to stop a fight. This wasn't business. It was a funeral procession. Heyman reached the bottom of the ramp and stood there, staring into the ring where his two Bloodline soldiers were, one crumpled on the mat, the other standing over him, chest heaving, unrepentant. It's important to remember that Paul Heyman isn't a character who moves fast. His power has always come from patience, from calculation. But this time, there was no smirk. No negotiation. No fear masked by wit. He entered the ring and didn't look at Solo. He walked right up to Jacob Fatu, eyes locked. You could hear the crowd hush for just a second, like everyone was holding their breath. Then Heyman raised a mic. There was no performance in his voice. It wasn't amplified. It was raw, almost quiet. He said 7 words, "You're out. You're not Bloodline." And just like that, the most silent man in WWE made the loudest decision of the year. He turned his back and left the ring. Jacob Fatu didn't follow him. He didn't attack him. He didn't even look confused. He just stood over Solo's body, breathing hard, staring into nothing. The show didn't fade to black. It didn't end with a logo or a promo. The final image was the overhead shot, Solo broken. Fatu standing. Heyman walking away. The Bloodline, splintered. Backstage sources later claimed that WWE had deliberately kept the finish under wraps. Not even most of the locker room knew what was coming. Some were watching it unfold from behind the curtain, just as shocked as the audience. The timing wasn't random. Roman Reigns had been off-screen for months. Ratings were beginning to stagnate. The Usos were scattered across brands. And fans were losing clarity on what the Bloodline even was anymore. But this? This changed everything. Because SmackDown wasn't just a weekly show anymore. It became a turning point. In a span of 15 minutes, WWE had transformed its most dominant faction into a war zone. Not by introducing a new champion. Not with a title match. Not with pyrotechnics or surprise stipulations. With betrayal. With silence. With violence so focused, it felt real. The Bloodline's mystique had always been about unity, about control, about dominance through family ties. But what happens when the family forgets who's in charge? When loyalty becomes currency and no one's buying? SmackDown answered that question with force. And now nothing is the same. The locker room knows it. The commentary table knows it. The audience? They're not watching a faction implode. They're watching a kingdom burn. This wasn't the beginning of a new era. It was the end of one. And the wreckage is just starting to settle. There are moments in wrestling that redefine a character. That reshape the landscape. That break through the fourth wall and make fans forget the script. Jacob Fatu's assault on Solo Sikoa wasn't just a surprise attack. It was a moment that said, this isn't theater anymore. This is a hostile takeover. The word attack doesn't even do it justice. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't part of a feud build-up. There were no catchphrases, no warning tweets, no mysterious backstage segments planted weeks in advance. It was sudden. Explosive. Surgical. And yet, it felt inevitable the second it began. Jacob Fatu hit the ring like he was tearing down a wall. No wasted movement. No eye contact with the crowd. His focus was locked on Solo Sikoa from the jump. The first hit landed like a car crash. A shoulder block so hard, Solo's feet left the mat. You don't see that happen to someone his size. But Fatu isn't just heavy. He's explosive. The kind of athlete that defies physics. The kind of danger you can't game plan for. Solo rolled over and tried to pop back up, but it wasn't like his usual rebound. His hands pressed against the mat slower than usual. His breath came in short, ragged bursts. That one hit had disoriented him. Then came the second blow, a palm strike right under the jaw. It looked brutal. Because it was brutal. You don't fake something like that. Fatu wasn't working stiff. He was working real. And Solo knew it. The next 30 seconds were a blur of violence. A spinning heel kick knocked Solo into the corner. Fatu followed up with a crushing running hip attack, shades of Umaga, but meaner, faster, angrier. The turnbuckle shook on impact. Solo's head whipped sideways against the top rope and stayed there. For a moment, it looked like the referees might jump in. But none of them moved. They stood frozen, eyes wide, as if unsure whether they were witnessing a segment or a real beatdown. In those moments, Jacob Fatu turned into something WWE hasn't seen in a long time, a believable, unpredictable monster. Not a gimmick. Not a cosplay of destruction. A legitimate physical threat that couldn't be reasoned with, paid off, or talked down. And he wasn't done. Fatu yanked Solo out of the corner and dropped him with a Samoan drop that made the entire ring shudder. He immediately followed up, without pause, with a standing moonsault. The arena exploded. It didn't matter if people hated it or loved it. Everyone felt it. But the attack wasn't over. Fatu rolled to his feet, climbed the turnbuckle with zero hesitation, and launched into a top rope moonsault, again. This time, he landed even cleaner. His chest collided with Solo's ribs like a hammer hitting wet wood. The sound was sickening. Solo didn't move after that. Not a twitch. Not a breath. Just silence. But here's what made it worse, Fatu didn't celebrate. He didn't smirk. He didn't yell. He stood. Arms loose at his sides. Head tilted slightly forward. Breathing hard. Looking down at the body beneath him like he wasn't sure if he was finished, or just getting started. The production team cut to the crowd. You could see fans with their hands over their mouths, staring like they were watching a live car crash. People weren't chanting. They weren't booing. They were absorbing. This didn't feel like an angle. This felt like a warning. So what pushed it to that level? Part of it was the delivery. Fatu's moves weren't flashy. They were fast, sharp, and precise. Like he wasn't trying to entertain, he was trying to destroy. Another part was the context. The Bloodline has always been about order. About dominance through structure. Roman Reigns ran it like a mafia family. He didn't just destroy his enemies. He absorbed them. He made them kiss the ring. Submission wasn't optional, it was the only path to survival. And that's what makes Jacob Fatu's attack even more terrifying. He didn't ask to be accepted. He didn't demand a seat at the table. He kicked the table over, destroyed the chair, and shattered the walls of the room they were sitting in. He didn't just break the rules. He didn't even acknowledge that rules existed. You want to understand what makes a moment like this resonate? It's because it violates expectations in a way that feels raw, not random. Fatu didn't come to wrestle. He came to remove. And what he removed was Solo Sikoa. Let's talk about Solo for a moment. Up until this night, he had been the enforcer. The quiet destroyer. The man who answered to no one but the tribal chief. He was the one who stood tall when Jimmy and Jay bickered. The one who made sure the job got done. He rarely spoke. But he never disobeyed. Solo was loyalty incarnate. Which makes what happened all the more cruel. Because for all of Solo's service, for all his silence, his obedience, his violence in the name of the Bloodline, he was the first to be discarded. And not even by Reigns. Not by HEYMAN. By Fatu. There was no argument. No betrayal of trust. No reveal. Just power. That's how real-world coups happen. You don't take over by negotiation. You remove the current force, violently, decisively, and in public. And that's exactly what Fatu did. By the time HEYMAN entered the ring, the match, if you could even call it that, was already over. Solo wasn't just beaten. He was erased. The act of violence wasn't just about physical superiority. It was about messaging. Fatu didn't want to fight. He wanted to establish dominance. In combat, there's a term, overwhelming force. It's when one side hits the other with so much power, so quickly, that there's no time to counter, no space to respond. It's not a fight. It's a collapse. That's what happened to Solo Sikoa. There were no reversals. No last-minute rallies. No hope spots. Just a calculated, explosive demolition. What Fatu did on SmackDown was more than a physical statement. It was a narrative one. WWE loves slow burns. It loves teases and cliffhangers and long-term storytelling. But sometimes, the most powerful move is the unexpected hammer to the skull. The sucker punch. The violence that refuses to wait. Fatu flipped the table not just in the ring, but in the structure of the story. He didn't ask for screen time. He took it. And by the time the camera faded out, no one was thinking about title belts or brand splits or Survivor Series. They were thinking about Jacob Fatu. Not as a new character, but as a problem. And problems like that don't go away. They escalate. You don't just walk into WWE and tear down one of its most dominant factions without a history. Without a reputation. Without a reason to be feared. Jacob Fatu didn't come out of nowhere. For fans who only follow the main roster, he may have looked like a new monster, suddenly materializing to wreak havoc. But the truth is this, Jacob Fatu has been a monster for a long time, just not under Vince McMahon's lights. Until now. So who is Jacob Fatu? Let's break it down. Jacob Fatu is not just another cousin. He's not a side character. He's the nephew of Rikishi, the son of the Tonga Kid, and a direct bloodline relative of the Usos and Roman Reigns. That lineage alone places him deep within the Anoa'i family tree, a dynasty responsible for shaping decades of wrestling history. But unlike Roman, who was trained and groomed for the big stage, Jacob's path wasn't handed to him. It was carved through chaos. He didn't start in WWE developmental. He didn't rise through NXT or come in with a buzzworthy indie reputation from the usual spots like Ring of Honor or PWG. Jacob Fatu built his legend in MLW, Major League Wrestling. And what he did there? It was scary. He wasn't just a top guy. He was the guy. He held the MLW World Heavyweight Championship for a record-breaking 819 days. That's over 2 years of dominance. Not as a tweener. Not as a face. As a predator. While most modern wrestling champions blend athleticism with charisma, Fatu did something else, he overwhelmed. His matches were violent, fast-paced, and relentless. A combination of raw brutality and terrifying agility. He didn't look like someone with top rope skills. But he had them. He didn't act like someone who could cut a promo. But when he spoke, people listened. Fatu wasn't manufactured. He wasn't polished. He didn't have a catchphrase or a slick logo. He had presence. The kind you can't teach. In MLW, he joined a faction called Contra Unit, a heel stable focused on chaos, violence, and insurgency. It wasn't just a wrestling gimmick. It was closer to a militia. Their branding leaned into terrorism symbolism. They weren't trying to be cool villains. They were threats. And Fatu was the center of that threat. He didn't win clean. He didn't play by rules. He demolished opponents with speed, size, and sadism. His run wasn't just dominant. It was terrifying. People started calling him the Samoan werewolf. And it stuck. Because it fit. Jacob Fatu doesn't wrestle like a man. He attacks like a beast. He paces. He snarls. He pounces. He doesn't wait for you to get up. He makes sure you stay down. That's what makes him different from Roman Reigns or the Usos. Reigns uses psychology. Jimmy and Jay use tactics. Fatu uses destruction. But Jacob Fatu's story isn't just about his in-ring record. It's about redemption, too. Because before he was a wrestling champion, before he was feared, Jacob Fatu was in trouble. Real trouble. He's open about it now. He spent time in prison. He grew up surrounded by violence, both in the ring and out of it. He didn't follow the path set by his famous relatives at first. He rebelled. He fell into the streets. But prison changed him. Not in a sanitized, PR-friendly way. In a real, life-or-death way. When he got out, wrestling wasn't just a job, it was survival. It was his way to reclaim his name. His way to take the chaos inside him and weaponize it for something greater. And it worked. He started training seriously. Took bookings no one wanted. Wrestled in gyms, in VFW halls, in parking lots. Then MLW found him. And the rest is legend. That legend brought him to WWE's doorstep more than once. But for years, they didn't bring him in. Why? Because he was too real. Too raw. Too much of a risk. WWE is a corporation. And Jacob Fatu wasn't a corporate guy. But times change. And so does desperation. The Bloodline was running out of steam. Reigns was on hiatus. The storylines were going in circles. Enter Jacob Fatu. Not as a savior. As a reset button. What's most important to understand is this: Fatu isn't a character they created. He's a threat they imported. A weapon they thought they could aim. But you don't aim a werewolf. You let it loose, and hope you're not standing too close. The moment Jacob Fatu hit the ring on SmackDown, WWE's tone shifted. You could see it in the way commentary stumbled over itself. In the way security didn't rush the ring. In the way Paul Heyman didn't step in until it was over. It wasn't scripted drama. It was submission. Jacob Fatu took control not because someone handed it to him, but because everyone else realized they couldn't stop him. Fatu's arrival also opens a dangerous question: what happens to the Bloodline now? Because this man doesn't fit the mold. Roman Reigns built the Bloodline like a machine. Fatu is the bomb that breaks the machine. He doesn't take orders. He doesn't negotiate. He doesn't speak in riddles or family parables. He shows up, breaks people, and leaves. You think Reigns will control that? You think Heyman thought he could manage that? Of course not. This isn't about leadership. This isn't about legacy. This is about fear. Fatu doesn't want to be next in line. He wants to burn the line down. And that makes him the most dangerous person in WWE today. When Fatu left the ring that night, Solo Sikoa destroyed behind him, Heyman in retreat, he didn't soak in the crowd. He didn't acknowledge the cameras. He just walked out like nothing happened. Because to him, nothing had. Solo wasn't a betrayal. He was a message. And everyone heard it. Jacob Fatu is here. And no one is safe. Before SmackDown erupted, before Jacob Fatu made a mockery of loyalty, and before Paul Heyman severed ties with cold finality, Solo Sikoa stood exactly where he always had, behind the chaos, never in front of it. That was the role he accepted, the weight he bore. He wasn't the mouthpiece, the strategist, or the face of the Bloodline. He was the muscle. The enforcer. The one who didn't need words because pain was his language. And for nearly 2 years, it worked. Solo Sikoa walked into WWE like a ghost from a forgotten battlefield. He didn't smile. He didn't dance. He didn't talk. He just wrecked people. Night after night, match after match, Solo moved with the quiet intensity of a soldier who knew his purpose: do the damage, ask no questions, obey the chain of command. In the Bloodline's golden era, that made him invaluable. Jimmy and Jay squabbled. Roman dictated. Heyman whispered. Solo enforced. You could see it in the way people reacted when his music hit. That low, menacing beat, followed by a slow walk to the ring. No posing. No fanfare. Just the aura of someone who didn't care about the crowd's cheers or boos. Only the job. He was the storm that followed Roman's judgment. When Roman wanted a message sent, Solo was the delivery system. When someone stepped out of line, Solo was the consequence. And for a long time, he stayed in line. He didn't challenge Roman. He didn't speak when Heyman cut promos. He didn't interfere unless signaled. That was his strength. That was his cage. Because when you build a role entirely around silence, loyalty, and obedience, you don't get to evolve. You don't get to adapt. You only get one choice: follow, or be left behind. Solo never betrayed the Bloodline. He never walked away. He didn't question Roman's absence. He didn't resist Jacob Fatu's arrival. He stayed loyal. And that's what got him destroyed. What happened on SmackDown wasn't just an ambush. It was a revelation. It showed that in the Bloodline, loyalty doesn't protect you. It makes you vulnerable. Because when Roman Reigns disappeared, Solo didn't seize power. He didn't claim the throne. He waited. He waited for someone to tell him what to do. But no one came. So he did what he always did: stood his ground, arms folded, expression unreadable, waiting for the next order. Except this time, the only order was violence. Jacob Fatu didn't just beat Solo. He exposed him. He showed that Solo Sikoa, for all his strength, had nothing left to protect him. No backup. No shield. No plan. Just the idea that loyalty would be enough. And in WWE, loyalty is paper. Violence is steel. What makes Solo's collapse so tragic is that it felt earned. He didn't deserve betrayal. He didn't backstab anyone. He never tried to lead. He never demanded recognition. He just followed. And the moment the Bloodline began to splinter, he was the one holding the pieces, trying to keep the story alive. But the story had already moved on. Solo had become the relic. The last one clinging to a version of the Bloodline that no longer existed. Jimmy was gone. Jay had made his peace. Roman was off the board. And Heyman? He was already watching the future rise. So when Jacob Fatu entered, Solo thought he was looking at reinforcements. Instead, he was looking at the end. Let's talk about the psychology of it. Solo Sikoa's character has never been about complexity. He's not layered with insecurity or hubris. He's not obsessed with status or legacy. He's simple: he fights for family. So what happens when family turns on you? He didn't lash out. He didn't scream or fall to his knees in despair. He just took it. Even as Fatu destroyed him, even as moonsaults crashed down on his chest and his limbs stopped moving, Solo didn't beg. He didn't quit. He just absorbed. Like he always had. But this time, no one came to pull him out of the fire. Not Heyman. Not Roman. Not the crowd. Because the machine had already moved past him. And yet, there's a dangerous truth beneath the silence. Solo Sikoa might be down, but he's not finished. He's not a manager. He's not a showman. He's not broken. He's a weapon, one that's been turned on, used up, and discarded. That's a dangerous place to be. Because weapons don't forget. They reload. What happens when the quiet enforcer has nothing left to enforce? What happens when the loyalty dies and all that's left is rage? Solo's future now hangs in limbo. WWE hasn't issued an injury report. Commentary has gone quiet about him. No tweets. No post-show footage. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes before something returns. But here's the twist, this time, Solo won't be returning for the Bloodline. He may come back for revenge. He may come back to find out who he is without orders. Or he may not come back at all, because in WWE, loyalty has a short shelf life, and being replaced isn't a twist. It's a pattern. One thing's for sure, Solo Sikoa isn't going to stay a victim. Because if the Bloodline taught us anything, it's this: no one stays loyal forever. Not when blood is spilled. It was the slowest walk of his career. When Paul Heyman emerged from the backstage curtain on SmackDown, he didn't strut like a man in control. He didn't carry himself with the smug, self-satisfied air that's been his signature for decades. He didn't clutch a mic like it was a weapon or shield. He walked like a man approaching a funeral. His funeral. The Bloodline had been his masterpiece. A vision crafted not with force, but with manipulation, patience, and fear. Heyman wasn't just a manager, he was the architect of an empire. Roman Reigns was the head of the table, yes. But Heyman set the table. He placed every dish, every knife, every fork. He knew the moves before anyone else did, because he wrote them. But on this night, he hadn't written anything. Jacob Fatu had rewritten the script in blood. And Paul Heyman, for the first time in years, wasn't controlling the chaos. He was walking into it. The crowd saw him coming, but didn't know what to expect. Was he there to plead with Fatu? To rein him in? To declare him the new right hand? The truth was stranger, and colder. Heyman entered the ring slowly. Deliberately. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't acknowledge the commentators screaming his name. He walked up to Jacob Fatu, who hadn't moved since decimating Solo Sikoa, and stood face to face with the storm. And then came the moment. Heyman raised the mic. No long-winded monologue. No ladies and gentlemen theatrics. Just one line. You're out. You're not Bloodline. 7 words. Each one cutting deeper than the last. Not shouted. Not screamed. Stated. And with that, the man who once defended Brock Lesnar against the world, who spoke Roman Reigns into a god, who orchestrated years of destruction across WWE, made a decision no one thought possible. He cut off his own creation. He excommunicated Solo Sikoa. Not with a beatdown. Not with an attack. With a sentence. And then he turned and left. So why did it matter? Because it wasn't just a choice. It was a confession. By casting out Solo, Paul Heyman was admitting something the audience had already begun to suspect: the Bloodline is no longer under control. Reigns is gone. The Usos are fractured. Fatu just lit a match and dropped it on everything Heyman had built. And Heyman's response? He let it burn. Because here's the thing about Paul Heyman, he's a survivor. Always has been. From ECW to WWE, he's never been the one in power. He's the one whispering into power's ear. But when power shifts, Heyman shifts with it. Cutting off Solo wasn't about betrayal. It was about preservation. Heyman knows the old order is dead. He saw it in the way Fatu moved. In the wreckage of Solo's body. In the crowd's stunned silence. This wasn't a glitch in the system. This was the new system. And Heyman didn't argue with it. He adapted to it. Like he always does. There's a phrase people use in war: tactical retreat. That's what Heyman did. He didn't confront Fatu. He didn't try to soothe Solo. He didn't explain himself. Because he knew there was no use. There was no faction left to manage. No line of succession. No family unity. Just chaos. And he chose a side. Not Roman's. Not Solo's. His own. For years, fans have wondered whether Heyman was truly loyal to Roman Reigns, or just loyal to winning. That question now has an answer. When the walls crumbled, he didn't stand in the ruins. He stepped over them. And walked away. This is the beginning of a new Paul Heyman. Not the mastermind of the Bloodline. Not the advisor to the tribal chief. Something colder. More dangerous. A man unbound from loyalty, no longer chained to the empire he built. He's seen it fall once before, with Brock Lesnar. Now it's happening again. But this time, he didn't wait for the implosion. He delivered it. 7 words. Final. Fatal. You're out. You're not Bloodline. What happened on SmackDown didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't a freak moment. It was a fuse burning in plain sight, inching closer with every segment, every stare down, every uneasy silence over the past year. This wasn't the collapse of the Bloodline. This was the culmination. To understand that, you have to look back, not just at the betrayals and fights, but at the tension that held everything together. Because the Bloodline didn't explode overnight. It decayed, piece by piece. It started with cracks. You remember them. Jey Uso, standing in the ring with tears in his eyes after clash at the castle, torn between obeying his cousin and defending his brother. Jimmy, refusing to kneel. Sami Zayn, manipulating the dynamic from the inside, creating loyalty in one and resentment in another. The family was never truly unified. It was controlled. And the one holding the remote was Roman Reigns. Roman was never a traditional leader. He ruled through psychological warfare. He didn't win people's hearts. He broke their will. The head of the table was more than a nickname, it was a warning, there's no room beside him. You either served him or you were destroyed. And for a while, that system worked. The titles stacked up. The promos hit harder. The crowd couldn't look away. But the thing about systems built on fear? They don't last. They rot from the inside. When Sami Zayn cracked the armor with a steel chair at Royal Rumble 2023, it was more than a turn. It was a signal. The crowd didn't boo. They cheered. Because they'd seen the manipulation. The gaslighting. The favoritism. And they were ready for someone to fight back. The Bloodline survived the betrayal, but barely. The Usos started to falter. Jimmy clashed with Roman. Jey walked away entirely. Solo became the emergency duct tape holding the story together, showing up week after week to maintain a version of the Bloodline that no longer existed. Even then, Roman still had Heyman. But power without loyalty is a house with no foundation. And the second Roman left TV to recover, the cracks turned into craters. No one knew who was in charge anymore. Solo began calling shots backstage. Jimmy wandered through segments with no direction. Heyman looked less like a mastermind and more like a man watching a car slide toward a cliff. And the audience noticed. They stopped reacting to the Bloodline as a threat. They started reacting to it like a memory. The tension was gone. The cohesion? Dead. What remained was smoke, mirrors, and legacy. Until Fatu walked in and gave everyone what they didn't realize they needed. A full system reset. Jacob Fatu didn't just attack Solo Sikoa. He buried the illusion that the Bloodline was still intact. He didn't challenge Roman. He didn't ask Heyman for guidance. He walked in, saw the ashes, and burned whatever was left. And when Heyman looked into his eyes, he didn't resist. He recognized him. Not as a soldier. As the truth. The empire was already over. Fatu just made it official. This is how collapses happen. Not in one night. But in moments spread out across months, even years. When you rewatch the promos, the backstage stares, the shoulder bumps between Solo and Jimmy, you see it. The unease. The fatigue. The repetition. The Bloodline had become a story on autopilot. It needed a new engine. And Fatu wasn't that engine. He was the sledgehammer. The demolition before whatever comes next. Now the question is, what rises from the ruins? Because the Bloodline as we knew it is gone. Not because someone declared it. But because no one fought to stop it. When you think of Paul Heyman, you think of control. He's the man who built ECW from the ashes of nothing. The voice behind Brock Lesnar's destruction of the streak. The strategist who sculpted Roman Reigns into the tribal chief and made the Bloodline WWE's most dominant faction in decades. But here's the uncomfortable question SmackDown forced everyone to ask: was Heyman ever really in control of the Bloodline? Or has he just been surviving it? Because what we saw when he walked out to confront Jacob Fatu wasn't a mastermind at work. It was a man cornered. Heyman didn't hold a script. He didn't cut a 20-minute promo full of spin and misdirection. He didn't even try to manipulate the situation. He surrendered to it. He walked into that ring, looked the Samoan werewolf dead in the eyes, and did the only thing he could do to survive the new order. He cut ties. He sacrificed Solo. Not out of strategy. Out of necessity. For years, Paul Heyman has positioned himself next to power, never at the center of it. That's his gift. He's not the king. He's the kingmaker. He moves from empire to empire, always placing himself next to the man with the sword. Brock Lesnar. Roman Reigns. The list goes on. But there's a fine line between being a kingmaker and being a hostage. Because if you look at the Bloodline's most pivotal moments, Heyman wasn't pulling strings. He was reacting. When Jey Uso defied Roman, Heyman wasn't guiding. He was watching. When Jimmy returned and started pushing back, Heyman didn't neutralize the threat. He whispered into Roman's ear and hoped things stayed balanced. And when Sami Zayn blew up the family from within? Heyman didn't see it coming. He only knew how to spin it afterward. This is the dirty secret behind Paul Heyman's brilliance: he's always a few steps behind when chaos hits. But he's world-class at pretending he planned it all along. Until now. Because Fatu didn't give him that chance. The assault was too fast. Too brutal. Too final. Heyman walked out not as a manipulator, not as a leader. But as a man with no other move. And when he looked into Jacob Fatu's eyes, what he saw wasn't opportunity. It was inevitability. That moment, those 7 words, "You're out. You're not Bloodline," wasn't a power move. It was an admission. Heyman had no one left to protect. No one left to rally. Roman was gone. The Usos were gone. Solo had just been physically erased. Heyman was standing alone, in a ring that used to be a throne room, now turned into a graveyard. So he did the only thing he could. He bent the knee to the chaos. He didn't fight Jacob Fatu. He accepted him. Because maybe Heyman finally realized something: the Bloodline wasn't built to last. It was built to burn. And the longer he held on, the more likely he'd burn with it. But don't mistake that moment for weakness. It was survival. And no one in WWE has survived more than Paul Heyman. He's endured lawsuits, bankruptcy, betrayal, exiles, and comebacks. His genius isn't in domination, it's in adaptation. And now? He's adapting again. This time not by whispering into Roman's ear. But by watching the new monster in the room and saying, "I understand." That's the difference between a puppet master and a prisoner. The puppet master cuts his own strings before they get tangled. The prisoner waits too long and dies in the collapse. Heyman made his choice. And it was cold. Solo was out. Fatu was in. Whether he controls it or not doesn't matter anymore. Because Heyman knows one thing better than anyone else: empires fall. But survivors? They rewrite history. Wrestling turns are usually about jealousy, titles, or betrayal. Someone gets overlooked. Someone gets disrespected. Someone sees a spotlight and wants to stand in it alone. That's how these stories normally go. But Jacob Fatu's attack on Solo Sikoa? It didn't follow the rules. There were no words. No promos. No signs of tension. No clues dropped on social media. He just appeared. And then he struck. So why? Why would a member of the Anoa'i dynasty, a family rooted in tradition, in loyalty, in blood, walk into the bloodline not to join it, but to rip it apart? Was it power? Was it personal? Or was it something deeper? Let's break it down. Start with the legacy. The Anoa'i family is one of the most powerful and respected dynasties in wrestling history. Their influence spans generations, continents, and promotions. Yokozuna, Rikishi, Umaga, Roman Reigns, the Usos, the Wild Samoans. All legends. All family. And in the middle of that tree, quietly, fiercely, was Jacob Fatu. He wasn't raised to be second best. He wasn't trained to follow. His bloodline is royal. But his path wasn't paved. It was fought for. While Roman Reigns became the guy on WWE's biggest stage, Fatu was carving his name in places most fans didn't even watch. He didn't inherit a crown. He earned scars. So imagine being a monster in the family, only to be told there's a table, and you're not sitting at it. Imagine being a weapon forged in fire, only to be treated like a backup plan. That's how this all starts. Now look at the bloodline from Fatu's perspective. Roman Reigns built it as a symbol of unity, power, and tradition. But over time, it became a tool for manipulation. A weapon for control. It wasn't about brotherhood. It was about submission. You follow orders, or you bleed. Sami Zayn was brought in and thrown out. Jimmy Uso was elevated and exiled. Jay broke, then broke away. Solo became the last believer in a religion no one else practiced. And then Fatu showed up. Not as a convert. As a non-believer. He looked at the fractured, tired remnants of the bloodline and saw weakness. Roman gone. Jimmy and Jay AWOL. Solo pretending the house wasn't burning. HEYMAN clinging to a ghost. What do you do when you walk into a castle made of ash? You don't kneel. You torch what's left and build your own. Here's the deeper layer, maybe Fatu didn't turn at all. Maybe this was the plan. Not Roman's. Not HEYMAN's. His. Maybe he never wanted to be part of the bloodline. Maybe he came to destroy it from day one. That's what makes his debut so unsettling. He didn't posture. He didn't ask for acceptance. He didn't even acknowledge the lineage. He walked into the ring, bypassed the politics, and went straight for the jugular. Solo Sikoa. The enforcer. The gatekeeper. The final piece of Roman's wall. Fatu tore it down with no emotion. Because he didn't need the bloodline. He needed to end it. There's another possibility. One more dangerous. What if Fatu isn't trying to destroy the bloodline out of hate? What if he thinks he's saving it? In Samoan culture, and in many tribal cultures, there's a sacred weight to legacy. If a leader grows weak, if a house loses honor, it must be cleansed. Not rebuilt. Purged. Roman's empire became about fear, not family. Maybe Fatu believes that to rebuild the name, he has to eliminate everyone who corrupted it. Solo included. HEYMAN included. Even Roman, when the time comes. Fatu's actions weren't personal. They were strategic. He didn't just remove Solo. He made a public example. He didn't sneak attack him backstage. He brutalized him in front of the world. That wasn't a message to Solo. It was a message to everyone. I'm not part of your story. I'm rewriting it. And here's where the psychology hits hardest. Fatu could have done this quietly. He could have played the game. Earned Heyman's trust. Built weeks of goodwill. But he didn't. Because monsters don't play games. They flip the board. He walked in, saw the rot, and burned it. There was no hesitation. No remorse. Because this wasn't a betrayal. This was a correction. Look at the aftermath. Heyman didn't resist. He accepted it. The crowd didn't boo. They cheered. Fatu didn't have to explain himself. Because real threats don't talk. They act. In WWE, new stars are usually introduced with hype, video packages, soft launches. Fatu got none of that. He didn't need it. He showed up, broke the illusion, and walked away untouched. That's not a heel turn. That's a takeover. And no one saw it coming. The question now isn't why did Fatu turn? The real question is, who's next? Because if Solo was the first name on the list, you can bet Roman Reigns is the last. And if Fatu's playing for legacy, not fame, not fortune, then there's no stopping him. Because he's not chasing gold. He's chasing blood.